Today we have a couple special treats for you. Today is actually the first episode of our new channel, the New Cow Corner. We have a very special guest for you today. Brilliant man. He's been in the hobby for God knows how long. He's made some incredible stuff, some incredible contributions to the hobby. Um, why don't you introduce yourself for our guests here?
So I'm Rob Haneisen, and I have been breeding reptiles for about 25 years now. I actually started off breeding reptiles, specifically leopard geckos and Honduran milk snakes, back in the mid 90s. That was back when, for people who keep leopard geckos, we only had three morphs. We had high yellow, we had jungles, and then we started to have tangerines. That was it. That's all there was. So that's how far back that goes. But I bred snakes for a significant period of time, a good 10 years, from the mid 90s to the early 2000s, and got my first Leachianus pair, so Leachianus gecko pair, in 2004, that I actually bought directly from the Hampers. And that kind of like set the bug for geckos, and specifically New Caledonian geckos. So I started building up more of a Leachianus collection and started weaning or thinning down my snake collection, and slowly built up my Leachianus collection for the next 15 years, successfully bred Leachianus for the past 15 years, and really had a very deliberate and slow process of building up that Leachianus collection. And it was pretty successful along the way, and I was able to expand out to some other New Caledonian species that really appealed to me. And those specifically were Chahoua, both the mainland and the Pine Island Chahoua, and gargoyles. And I also recently picked up some Saracenorums as well. So I've been keeping Chahoua now and breeding Chahoua for between 8 and 10 years. I had a couple years where I did them, and then I had a year or two where I took off, and then I came back to them. So probably 10 years total. And then the gargoyles as well were about the same time period. So that's kind of like where I came into reptiles. And I was saying earlier too that I've kind of slowly rebuilt some of my snake collection, because I think at heart I probably am a snake person. But I've always really enjoyed the geckos. They really are. It's really keeping two different things. And my big weakness is I don't have a lot of willpower when it comes to taking on new projects, because I always think I have more time. I always think that it would be cool to kind of do something different. And it's not that I lose interest in what I'm currently working on. It's just that there's so much out there to choose from.
Yes.
So
I
I've
100%.
so I've recently kind of built up my snake collection again.
What
And
are you working with? What species?
I have diamond pythons. I have black milk snakes. Black milk snakes are my favorite snake species. I actually wrote an article for Reptiles magazine back in 2010 or 2008.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So that was really cool. So black milk snakes, diamond pythons, hog island boas, Mexican pine snakes, womas, so woma pythons, and then also Kentucky pine snakes.
Awesome. I love your style, Rob. I have to admit it. You have this super, almost eccentric style. Like you have a very, like you said, deliberate collection. Like you have animals that are very, I don't know. I was talking about this. I was on someone's podcast or something the other day, and I was, talking about how excited I was about this episode. And I was trying to explain to them the type of keeper you are, the type of collection you have, rather. And I'm like, it's like if you're walking into an art gallery, like everything is like, like it's.
Thanks.
I really can't even articulate how I feel about your collection. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, your animals, they're one of a kinds, man. They're just incredible animals. I mean, everybody that knows anything about Leachianus knows what they're getting when they're getting one of Rob's Leachies, right? Like you have some monsters. I mean, your animals are just just on a level of their own. Your collection in general is, you know, you're not. You can tell you're not just a impulse like, oh, that's a
Mhm.
lychee, I'm just buying it. Oh, that's a
Yeah,
gargoyle, I'm buying it. Like,
yeah,
absolutely not. Like
yeah.
they have to be up to par. They have to fit a very specific notch in the
Hmm.
cog, if you will. You know, and I
Absolutely.
respect that. I absolutely respect that.
I think it has to do with making very deliberate decisions.
I don't know.
I mean, I mentioned before that I don't have a lot of willpower when it comes to
Mm.
taking on new projects. That's true. But when I do take on a project, I am really, really picky. Um, People who I've bought geckos from probably didn't enjoy the process too much because of the amount of information that I wanted. But it's because I give that information. When I sell geckos to people, I give them pictures of the parents, I give them full lineage, I give them everything that I know about this gecko. And
That's awesome.
I tend to want the same thing when I buy it. So sometimes breeders are just like, "Oh, okay, Rob, I'll send this to you. Yeah, yeah, okay, whatever." But it's because I'm going for something very, very specific, and I'm going for something specific because it's what I want. It's not necessarily what I think the market wants. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm not immune to what I think the market wants, but that's not the motivation. The motivation is like, when I pursued dark morph Leachianus geckos with Lucifer, who's one of my big GTs.
Famous,
I
famous
wanted
animal.
I wanted a very specific type of GT to fit that, and I kind of got lucky with that. I mean, I'm really proud of my collection. I'm very happy that other people enjoy
Should be.
some of the geckos that I produce, but there was some, I made some very deliberate decisions on who I bought from. And specifically, I only bought from very well established breeders who had just absolute top notch stock. And I paid a premium for it. And I wasn't looking for bargains. I wasn't like, I was like, no, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right. And I'm going to make sure that I get the absolute best that I can get for that project. And it means that my projects have always been small. I don't
Mhm.
have a very large collection, but what I do have, I take a lot of pride in. And I really and I think the other thing that benefited me, and it's a bit of advice I would give to everybody, I always bought babies. I never bought adults.
Me
Never,
too.
never,
Yep.
never. It's, you know, I think a lot of people kind of they want to get to a certain point in their projects as quickly as possible. And I understand the motivation for that because patience is sometimes in short supply with people.
It is
Um, and
indeed.
and sometimes people are motivated by money, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but people are motivated by money to start producing, so they think, okay, I'm going to buy adults. And in my experience, when I've done that, it has never turned out well. It's always been something that of one of two things: one, the animal doesn't quite fit into what I thought it was going to fit into for a project, um, or two, I just didn't have, for lack of a better word, emotional connection to this project and this animal. Perfect example. I got a pair of adult Sanzinia boas, so Madagascar tree boas, 2 years ago. It's a species that I had kept before about 10 or 12 years ago. I had a pair of hatchlings that I raised up for about a year and then sold them as yearlings, and really regretted doing that because I really liked that species. But they're part of what funded a Leachianas project, so I kind of rationalized it that way. But I always wanted to come back to that project. So I had a chance and I bought a pair of adult Sanzinia boas about 2 years ago. And anybody who knows them, they're a difficult species to breed.
Here.
They're difficult to get to breed successfully. You really have to cool them down a lot, which is fine because I cool all my geckos down, so it kind of works in well with that. But didn't have any success breeding them the first year or the second year, and just didn't really have the I guess the correct motivation to stay in that project. And it's because I bought them as adults. If I had bought them as hatchlings and raised them all the way up to 6 years old to be adults, so when they were ready to breed, I know that I would have had a longer commitment to that project. And they're a very valuable animal. So I'm like, listen, if I'm not going to be 100% in on this project because I bought them as adults and I'm really not as invested in them emotionally as I should be, I'm going to make sure I can get them to somebody who can do something with them because they're very valuable. So I ended up sending them back to the person who sold them to me, and he was very happy to get them back. It was
Yeah, right.
it was totally cool. I mean, it was like, hey, I'll send them back to you for the exact same amount that I paid for them 2 years ago. They're just bigger now, and it was totally cool. It was a, so it's one of those things where it's just like, okay, I tend to have these rules that I try to follow when I'm taking on projects, and I don't always follow them, and most of the time it doesn't work out when I don't follow those rules. So that's why those rules were there. So when I started building my Lichianas collection, the things that I wanted is I really liked Pine Island Lichianas. I really liked Dark Morph, and I really liked, unlike what a lot of people were pursuing with like dark geckos. When I first got into it, there weren't any Mel's, but I really liked the idea of trying to produce a very light-based colored gecko with colored blotches. So what I would call my pastel project, where it's a
Just
very,
looking at
very,
one today. Yeah.
and nobody else was really doing that, and nobody kind of does that. Everybody's really focused on the Mel's with color and stuff like that, and I totally get those are really pretty. But I wanted to create something that was like very, very light colored pastel with color, and what sparked it is I had a pair of geckos that produced this really bizarre looking baby that was just it. I mean, I had hatched out like 18 babies from this pairing before, and they were all very nice, but they weren't super special. And then this one popped out that, looking at it, I'm like, that looks like it's hypo. It's like glowing yellow with like red bars on it, and it just looked really different. And luckily I was smart enough and kept it back. I'm not very good at keeping stuff back, but I kept this one back, and she grew up, and she's in my collection. She's Anwin. So she's one of the big pastels that I have. That she is this. If people go on my Instagram feed or my Facebook feed, they'll see the pictures of her. She is like a very light green pastel base color with like these creamy white bars that have pink highlights on them. And she has produced all of. I've then paired her to some other lineages that kind of had that same characteristic that I was going for. And those babies, I haven't figured out what's going on, because there are some babies that hatch out and they look normal, they look nice, but they look normal. And then clutchmate right next to it, it looks like somebody just like spread like olive or spread like orange jam all over it. It's just like they have an orange or a salmon pink wash just all over them. They just have this different color and look to them. And I've kept those back and grown them up. And one of them actually is one of my male breeders now. His name is Moonchild, where he is, again, very light based in color, that kind of like pastel green color, but he has like red to pink blotches. So he really brought in a lot more color. So that's something that I'm like, okay, this is what appeals to me. I want to create these super pastels, and they're not super in the sense that there's like a recessive gene going on. I just call them supers because they look more than just a regular pastel.
Absolutely.
And it's a lineage, or it's not a lineage. It's a project that I've done for like 15 years now, and I'm on like the 4th generation of like figuring stuff. And I've got it to the point now where it's predictable I can predict it based on the baby. It's like when the babies hatch out, I'm like, that's normal. It's going to be nice, but it's one of the normal ones. And some of those normal ones still turn out really, really nice. And then the other ones, and then the other ones that hatch out, I'm like, that is going to be special. That one's going to be one of the really pretty pastels. It's going to have a lot of color. And then I pursued the Pine Island Lichianas because at the time I didn't have money to pursue GTs. And I'm like, okay, if I don't have money to pursue GTs, what's the next best thing in this that still appeals to having a big kind of chunky Lichianas that's going to have some really good color? And Pine Islands are perfect for that. Pine Islands are big. And going back to something I said earlier about making sure you buy from the best source that you can find. So Steve Semelli, Leap and Lychees, has incredible lineage for Pine Islands. So I ended up getting some F2s from him, that one of them turned out to be Harris, who is
really, I know who he is.
Harris. I would put Harris up against any Pine Island in the world.
I
He
know who
has
he is.
a
Yes, sir.
he's 310 grams. He has a massive amount of pattern, and it's pattern that's like white flecked with pink. He's got like a darker base color.
Yeah.
Body proportion, he is perfect. He's not chunky. He's not like a long and lean gecko. He's just there. If you want to see an absolute perfect
Mm.
Pine Island, Harris is it. And
Check him out.
he's a fantastic breeder. He produces
Guys, check out Rob's page, man. You got to see some of his animals, man, that we're talking about. Remember these names?
Yep,
Write them down if you have to. Look at
yep,
Rob's page and you will see what we are talking about. This
yep.
man makes art, makes living art with these animals, man. Go check this Gecko Harris out. Is like I hear the name and I know who he is. Like it's
Yeah,
he will leave that type of impression on you. Go check this. Go check the page out, guys.
thanks. Yeah, and the thing that's on, I mean, he's a sweetheart too. I mean,
Mm,
people talk about like, aggressiveness with Leachianus and stuff like that.
yeah.
Of all the Leachias I have one that
Mm.
I always have to make sure I have a glove on when I pull him out of the cage, and then he's fine after
I
that.
have none. I have none out of six of them. I always get into debates with people because I'm like, I get it. I understand there probably are super aggressive ones, but I cannot relate because mine don't.
Yeah.
Like as long as they see me coming,
Hmm.
they have zero problem with me taking them out and touching them and doing anything with them. You know, I've
Yep.
never been. They make noises.
Oh
Granted,
yeah.
they're communicating. Their grunts and their puffs and their whistles and whatnot, but again, like you said, I've bought them all from babies. I've grown to know
Hmm.
what every little chirp means. I've
Hmm.
learned my animals like my children, and I have
Yep.
to buy them from as close to a hatchling as possible for that
Hmm.
reason. We have a
Yeah.
lifelong relationship here, man. I want to know you right from the beginning. You know,
Hmm.
you watch your babies develop, you'll know what to look for when they do start having offspring. You know,
Hmm.
it's.
Yep.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but you
No,
know
you got a good.
exactly what you're saying, Rob.
Yeah, and it's funny, I get questions from people saying like, "Oh, what's," when I sell babies to people, they're like, "Oh, what's the
Mm,
temperament like?" I'm like, I don't handle my babies at all. I leave them alone because I don't think it makes a difference. I think it's
yeah.
good. I think it's good to buy babies because then you can establish them in your environment. Everybody's homes are different. Your cages are set up different. The geckos will pick up on patterns as far as like activity, lighting, stuff like that. You want them to get to
Sounds
be
like
sound, yeah, sounds especially. You want them to get to be comfortable and get to know what their home environment is. Handling them doesn't make any difference, I think, as far as temperament, especially when they're young. I really minimize handling just to health checks once a week. When I take stuff out for pictures, that's it. I don't take them out and like, look at them and like, oh, these, I'm going to hold this gecko for a while. I don't really do that until they're at least a year old. And
yeah.
that's why, because all I'm focused on and what I try to tell people to focus about with their baby geckos is just keep it comfortable, let it grow. That's all you want in the first year. And that's why, most of my Leachianus are way over 100 grams by the time they hit a year old, because all I focused on is giving them optimum growing conditions. And optimum growing conditions, the first rule is not temperature, it's not humidity, it's not cage size, it's stress. If you have a gecko that is not stressed and is not in an environment that is causing it any stress, it is going to grow phenomenal. If you have a gecko that is in perfect heat and humidity, it's a nice cage, but you're always taking it out, or it's exposed to a lot of exterior sound and disturbances, it's going to be stressed. It's not going to grow as well. It's not going to eat as well. So I mean, I always tell people just leave it alone. Just provide it the perfect optimum growing environment, and then once it gets to a year, then you can start having a little bit more interaction with it. It's going to be more confident. It's going to be more comfortable in its environment. Leachianus geckos, Chahoua, gargoyles, Saras, these are all long-term investments. And I use that term because they're not cheap, but your time is an investment. The caging you buy is an investment. The money that you spend on power to heat your cages and lighting and what you spend on food, that's all an investment. And what you're investing in is the health and longevity of that animal. And part of the health and longevity of that animal is the relationship that it has with you, or what kind of relationship you want to have with it. If you want to have a relationship where you can put your hand in the cage and it's going to walk out onto your arm and be totally cool with that for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you put your hand back towards the cage and it goes back in its cage, you can totally have that. You got to invest in that. And the first step of the
Sure.
but the first step of the investment is saying, I am not going to provide a stressful environment for this animal. I'm going to try and make it feel
Right.
comfortable, and I'm going to try and make it feel calm so that when it wants to do that, and you want to make it feel like it has a choice on what it's doing. You try to
I
force
agree.
something, on an animal, it's not going to be a good outcome.
Yeah, definitely not leeches. Definitely not GTs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
So I'd like to I can talk to you, Rob, for hours about so many things, but I think I got our guests super excited
mhm,
about talking about these Chahuas here.
yeah, yeah,
Now, I'm not trying to fluff your feathers or brown nose by any means, but we had options on people to talk to about Chahuas, and I really wanted you. I
okay,
really wanted to talk to you, and kind of for some of the reasons that we've already discussed. I like how you're deliberate. Everything you do is with a purpose. In
hmm,
order to do that, you have to have some sort of education, some sort of
yeah,
knowledge, right? You have
hmm,
to be super calculated
hmm,
in what you do to produce what you do, if that makes any type of sense.
yeah,
But tell us a little bit about your Chahoua background, your
hmm,
breeding experience, and then we'll get into to the meat of it. But
hmm.
give us a little bit of your view on Chahuas.
So about 12 years ago, I got a small group of Chahoua, and these were mainlands. And this was, I was doing well with the small collection of Leachianus that I had, and I was like, okay, well, if there's something else I want to try, these look really cool. And I think that's the first thing. It's like, okay, well, what appeals to people about Chahoua? They look damn cute for starters. I mean, they've got these cute
Coolest
faces,
babies.
and in hand, they are probably, I would say, they are they're the best pet gecko you can have in
I
hand.
say it all the time. I say it
Hands,
all the
hands.
time.
If somebody says, "Oh, I just want a gecko for a pet," I'm like, "Get a Chahoua." They're like, "Well, you really like Leachianus." I'm like, "Get a Chahoua." Chahoua are absolutely the best pet gecko. I've never been bit by a Chahoua. Never even tried to.
Well,
They will. Unless it's a female that's guarding eggs. That's the only time that you're gonna get snarled at. Um,
you're not lying.
but so the thing that appeals to me about Chua is the looks. They've got this great kind of like lichen color, particularly the mainlands, and there's a blend of green and red colors. It's a really cool pattern. Their prehensile tail is really interesting to have in hand because it will
Super
wrap
cool.
around your finger. Um, their activity is by far the best of any of the New Caledonian geckos. They are active during the day, they're active at night, they're great hunters of bugs, they bask out in the open, they're not shy. And there's all these things. They check off so many boxes.
All the
I do,
boxes.
yeah, I think the only box they don't check off is if it's somebody who says, "Well, I don't want to have to feed live insects," then I don't think they're the right gecko because
True, I agree. Yeah.
they do need live bugs at least once a week, particularly when they're young and growing. The
Mm,
Leachianus you can get away with not feeding live bugs as
mm.
often, but I really think Chahoua need live bugs.
They
I
do.
tend
They absolutely do.
I feed either dubia or crickets. It's funny. Another breeder, Brian Susan, told me this, where he's like he noticed this as well that when the Chahoua are young, they're really good at taking dubia. You put dubia in a bowl, they'll go in, grab them. Great. Just my gargoyles do that, my lychees do that, but they get to a certain age and they don't, for whatever reason, they don't want the dubia anymore. They want the
Yep.
crickets.
Yep.
So it just means you got to buy crickets. And I'm not gonna lie, buying crickets sucks. They smell, they die.
To
They can
breed
be
them,
no,
it's
yeah,
terrible. It's a
yeah.
full time job.
Yeah, they're noisy. They get loose in your house. You see them all the time. It's like okay, that's part of the deal. Um,
Yeah.
Luckily the dubia don't get loose in the house. So that's a better deal. Um, but so I started breeding Chahoua and mainlands at first, and I only had like a couple of pair, and they were just like a side project. I was just like,
Mhm.
these interest me. I want to do them as a side project. I'm not going to jump into them completely yet. And like all my other bigger projects, it was stuff that built slowly over time. And this hobby is not cheap.
No,
There's nothing inexpensive about this hobby. You try to cut corners, and eventually it's going to come back and bite you in the ass.
sure will.
Whether it's
Sure will.
whether it's buying inferior animals or trying to build your own cages. I am horrible at building cages. I've my whole life in keeping reptiles, I've always tried to build my own cages or setups, and it never turns out well. I mean, some of them, I'm not gonna lie, some of them I was like, look, I built a Leachianus cage out of an old dishwashing tub. It was okay, but in the end, I was just, it worked for a year or two, and then I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. And part of it, it's, I'll tell one little bit of history story. So growing up, I didn't have money. I didn't have money growing up. Really came from definitely working class background. So never had money for stuff when I was a kid. But I really liked reptiles. I really liked animals. And one year, I'm not sure why I got them. One year I got a group of dwarf Siberian hamsters at a pet store. And they were cute. They were fun. I was like, okay. And I didn't know that I had like a male and two females, because I had no intention of breeding until one day underneath the newspaper in there were all these little pink things that were wiggling around. I'm like, what? I'm like, oh my God, they had babies. So I raised them up and I contacted the pet store. I got them. I'm like, hey, those hamsters that I got from you like 8 months ago, I'm like, I've got babies from them now. They're like, well, we'll buy them from you if you want. And it was like it was like a light went off in my head. I was like, I can get the stuff that I really want too by selling these baby hamsters. And that was like the first like foundation lesson on being a breeder and pursuing projects when you don't, there's kind of a good thing about not having money is that you have to be really careful and you have to be really deliberate about what you're doing. You've got to do a lot of planning. And when you have losses of animals or if things don't go according to plan, it hurts. It's not just like, oh, that didn't work. It's like, damn, that was a lot of money and I don't really have it to lose. And so I mean, there's stress that comes with that. There are people who pursue projects, but that was a really good lesson for me of just like, hey, there are these other things at the pet store that I want, like those really cool lizards over there. But my paper route money isn't paying me enough to get that. So I mean, this is when I think I was like 12, so all I had was like paper route money. So it was a great lesson of like, this is how you can try and pursue other projects. So that's what got me. That's kind of the background of how I was able to get into Chahoua. The Leachianus were doing great, and there were these other things that I was like, oh, that'd be really cool if I could. Chahoua are expensive too, but all right, let's see if I can sell these Leachianus babies, do well this year, and then I can pursue that project. So what I found with the Chahoua, and this is pretty across the board for all the New Caledonian species. I can't say anything about crested geckos because I have never kept a crested gecko in my life.
Really?
Never. The first New Cal species I kept were Leachies. And then I went.
You said that's so cool. That's like how the opposite. It's like usually everybody's goal.
I went
start
backwards.
with crested gecko and they end with Leachies. It's like you went right from the top.
Yeah, no, I went backwards. I went from Leachies to Chahoua to gargoyles to Sarahs. I don't have any plans to go to cresteds. There are enough people doing cresteds right now. They're cute, but it's not necessary. So I started off with mainland Chahoua, produced some pretty decent ones with those. But what I found with those, just like all the other New Cal species, is you really have to know your animals when it comes time to getting ready to breed them. Chahoua are interesting in that they go through a massive growth spurt in the first year. And then it's like they hit a wall. And the mistake that I made the first time that I had Chahoua is they got to be about 18 months old. I'm like, they're adult size. The female just laid a set of duds. That means they're going to be ready to breed. Wrong. Nope, that didn't work.
Okay.
So, I mean, it didn't work in the sense that I think it was not the best choice to make for that animal. And it was because I didn't know any better. I thought that, okay, these are just like other New Cal species. Once they get to adult size, the female starts producing duds. That means she's ready. And with Chahoua especially, they really, I think, need an extra year. And because what I found is that when I didn't push them to breed when they were in their second year, they did get a little bit bigger. The females looked a little stouter. The males definitely got a little bit stouter. And they just had a more solid look, other than just being big enough and old enough and weighing enough. They had a different, mature look to them. And
Yeah.
the Chahoua that I waited to breed until they were in their third year, like they were like 3 years old, now they can breed much better. They and the way that I'm quantifying that is the geckos that I tried to breed too early. After every
Mhm.
clutch, squiggly, the female would get the squiggly tail. She looked really depleted. Really did not have a lot of
Mhm.
energy. I never lost any animals, but I really think that by doing that, probably shortened the breeding lifespan of that
Yeah.
female. And the babies from those early pairings were definitely not as big as the babies from the pairings that I waited on the geckos that were a little bit older and a little bit bigger. Um, Chahoua,
Interesting.
Chahoua definitely more than other new cow species, I think really have a weakness to calcium crash.
Hmm.
So you definitely need to make sure that you dust your crickets with a calcium powder, um, and um, they you just really have to watch the females to make sure that she's getting enough food, to make sure she's recovering after eggs. I think that the breeding process takes a lot out of the females with Chahoua compared to some of the other new cow species. You don't get as many clutches as Leachianus, or gargoyles. If you can get 2 to 3 good clutches out of a pair of Chahoua, that's good. Occasionally, you might get 4. But for me, if I can get
That
two,
few, huh?
say again?
No, that few, huh? So
Yeah,
all mine, Rob, I waited 3 years for all of mine. I have
good. Yeah.
7 pairs right now. I
Hmm.
have paired up that have all, I bought them all as babies.
Yep.
3 years. And that was just, I don't know, kind of by accident, right? Like I listened to so many people telling me the right way and the wrong way, and I have books that say you can breed them at a year, and
No, yeah.
I'm like all this crazy stuff, but I'm like I spent so much money,
Hmm.
like I don't know how to explain it personally, but there's a look, right? Like I looked at
Hmm.
my animal and was like, okay, you look ready, you look super healthy, right? So
Yeah.
I was comfortable around 3 years. Actually, a couple of them are probably a little over three
Yeah.
years
Yep.
before I paired them.
Hmm.
And Rob, I've never experienced my right hand to my God. I've never
Hmm.
experienced a wiggly tail, a sunken
Yep.
hip, a nothing with my animals. And
Yep.
yes, I've only got about 4 clutches so far out of all my pairs, but all the same, they looked as healthy the day after they laid them as the day they did, the day they did before, man.
Yep.
And maybe you're onto something with that. You got me thinking now, like, is that something where they just not mature? These people, they breed them, and I had so many people tell me like it's natural, it's just gonna happen. You can't avoid it. For 3 years of raising these things, I was losing my mind. Like that can't be natural.
Hmm.
Nature wouldn't make something that almost dies every time it gives birth unless it was supposed to die. Like it shouldn't be like this. What are we missing? So I
Yeah.
went crazy. I added limestone to my substrate. I upped everything I could, crushed coral, everything into my terrariums and vivariums
Hmm.
that would replicate New Caledonia as much as possible. I raise all my own feeders for my
Hmm.
Chahuas because I was so concerned about those sunken hips and some of the
Yep.
horror stories and pictures I had. I'm like, these are my babies, right?
Hmm.
Like these are my animals. I got 3 years plus of time
Yeah.
and all this effort into these things. I can't let them look like that or they're all sunken up in a corner, shriveling, begging for life. Like I got to
Yeah.
figure out a reason how to fix this. And I don't know what it is that I did of all these things, but again, never had a sunken hip, a wiggly
Hmm.
tail, a
Yep.
nothing. And my babies are strong. Them babies came out all even the mainlands and the Pine Islands. I mean,
Hmm.
they're beautiful, healthy, strong animals.
Yep. Yeah. I've had conversations with other breeders who agree on the 3 year. Paul Morlock at Rack House, he and I have had a lot of conversations
Yeah.
about this, and he's like, yeah, they just need that extra year. Um, Erica Paris at Arboreals Anonymous. I have several Chahoua from her. She's got
Yeah, that's
phenomenal
right.
Chahoua. Her Chahoua. I mean, if you're not fixated on white collar Chahoua, if you want the
I'm
ones that
not
are
into.
like that have a lot of like color, greens,
Mm,
reds, pastels, and just like
yeah.
and really really good body size.
Mhm.
Erica's got some fantastic geckos. So I have geckos
Really.
from her. Brian Susan from Sundown. He's got some great geckos. And Troy from Troy's Geckos. I've got a lot of geckos from him as well.
There you
Um,
go.
but it's like, you know, what I found is that when I just stuck to that rule of waiting till after their third birthday, and then they can start pairing up. Um, those they just do better. You don't get the squiggly tail, and I think like I said, it's knowing your animals, and
Yes.
they just look a little bit different when you give them that extra year. They've got a little bit more of an athletic look to them. They look a little stouter. The head might get a little bit broader. Um,
Yes.
they look more like they're ready, other than just like, yeah, I think you're
Mature.
ready. Yeah, they look
Yeah, they look
mature.
mature. They feel. I don't know. I try to explain this to people all the time because I'm
Yeah.
like, and I, I never got a chance to really speak to you, but I'm a Chahoua fanatic, Rob. Like
Mm,
they are my, what lychees are to you, and I love my lychees too. But I
mm,
mean, this Chahoua are what got me into this. Like I
yeah.
love Chahuas. Like they
Hmm.
are my. I cannot speak highly enough about these things, but I
Yeah.
talk about them all the time to so many people, and I'm always trying to explain these things. It's a look. It's not
Hmm.
an age. There's not a set amount of time. There's not a
Yep.
weight. It's a you know your animal, man. Like you
Yep.
have to know your animal. That's
Yep.
why I always preach. Also, again, buy them as young as you can. You want to
Yep.
learn that animal from a baby. You need to learn
Hmm.
its habits, its movements, it's everything. Like I said before, and you'll know after all watching all the growth spurts and phases. They'll
Yep.
get long and thin, and then they'll fill out a little, and they'll get a little
Hmm.
longer, and like there's
Yep.
not you can tell when they're done,
Yeah.
and it's like I think around that 3 year mark, to be honest, they're
Yep.
just healthy. I got
And
females that are over 100 grams, Rob. I have a
oh,
female, she's 104 grams. My
wow, that's
girl
huge.
Gunny. She's a sweetheart. 104 grams.
What's the
Yeah.
lineage on her?
She came from Boris over
Okay.
at Beaton's Crest of
Yep.
Geckos. Now
Yep.
apparently he's got a line that he's been working with. I mean, he forgot her parents' name, but I do have her lineage. But
Yeah.
he's got a little project going over there. I have two
Yep.
females from her. The other one's 98 grams, so
Hmm.
she'll break 100. But
Nice.
she's right now she's 2.5, and she's 98. The last time I had her on a scale. So those
That's
two
huge.
females came from him. They're huge. The biggest male I have is 70 grams.
Yeah.
So it's like that's
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Most of my Pine Islands are somewhere between 70 and 75.
Uh,
Um, and they might get a little bit bigger than that, but that's where they're at.
uh,
What I found, if you can find some of the old school lineage, the stuff that goes back to Bill Hughes, the stuff that goes back to Tremper. I mean, if you can get some of that older school stuff and then mix that in with some of the newer lineage, I think that's good for size, and that's good for creating good body tone or body shape. Um,
yeah.
that's I think that helps a lot. But it's I'm trying to think of like physical cues that people can look at for when they're, thickness of the tail, like how the thickness of the tail and how the tail is muscular all the way
Absolutely.
down.
Absolutely.
On a good mature Chahoua gecko, that tail is going to be thick and muscular, and it's not going to be thin. And again, that's one of the things you can kind of do in hand, and you can kind of hold like a 2 year old in your hand, and you can hold a 3 or 4 year old in your hand, and there's just a different feel to them. There's a different confidence to them, and that's when they're ready. And you can get away with breeding other geckos earlier. I mean, I've bred Leachianus at 3 years pretty consistently, and they handle it well. Um, as long as they're in really good condition, and you really stay on top of their nutrition,
Yeah.
keep their stress very low, and if it's a good pairing, Chahoua, you really just you can't get away with that. You have to. You just really got to make sure they're ready. And I don't know if you've ever had this. I have never had any aggression issues with pairing, any non-compatibility issues, and I've seen other people talk about issues
Yeah.
with compatibility, and I've got 15 pairs of Chahoua, and all of them, when I put them together, were perfect. No
one
fighting.
time one time that big girl, and I and
Hmm.
I, I don't know if it's I know it sounds crazy, but when I got her she was like I probably did more than I should have with her. I
Hmm.
would do weird stuff. Put her in my pocket. I take her to the store. I do like all types of like strange things. I
Yeah.
love the prehensile tail. She was just always with me, always out around my dog, around my freaking cat, around my bearded dragons. Like I would just have her out all the time.
Hmm.
And I feel like she almost got like a strange attachment to me. When I would come to the room, she'd be pawing at the glass to come out. She just like just a weird attachment. When I
Hmm.
put a male in with her, she freaking went crazy. She
Mm.
puffed up, chased him around the cage, barking, squonking. Like, as
Wow.
soon as I take him out, she'd come over. She'd rest her head down on the bark, wait for a little head rub, a little chin rub, and everything is fine. I put
Hmm.
this male in, totally different animal. So I did it 2, 3
Hmm.
times. I want him sleeping in my gecko room for the night.
Hmm.
And
Been there.
it wind up working out, but I mean, it was the only time I had a headache out of all the pairs was that. The other ones, it's almost like what are people talking about? Like they like we're instantly gonna go head to tail like dogs. They'd sniff each other. You get a little head bob from the male, maybe a little grunt or something. And the next
Hmm.
thing you know, it's over. They're fine.
Yeah.
No, nothing. And the mainlands twice as easy. And I don't know if it's a
Oh God,
difference
yeah.
in locale, but it's like they were born to be together. Like they just
I think so. I think the mainlands are much easier to breed. Um, yeah, I think the mainlands are a little bit easier to breed.
mm,
Um, the and maybe it's just because they're a little bit smaller. I'm not really. I don't have an inside line as to why this case, but I've seen the same thing. I think they're easier to pair. They're easier to breed.
yeah.
They seem to be more consistent in egg production. Um, so yeah, the mainlands are a little bit easier. So I mean, I tell people like if you want to get into Chahoua, start with mainlands. You know,
Yeah. I do.
everybody's attracted to pines because yeah, pines are a little bit bigger, and you know if you get some of the high white pines or some of the extreme white pines or pines that have like crazy color on them and stuff like that, yeah, I get it. And those are thousands and thousands of dollars. It's a
Big
lot.
money. Big money.
It's big money. Um, but you get the same experience with a mainland. You know,
Absolutely.
if someone who wants a mainland Chahoua to be like, hey, I want to see if I'm going to Chahoua, get a mainland. Mainland. I have some mainlands, and you've seen the pictures I posted. I have some mainlands that have a ton of color on them that are like bright, like pink, red, and orange, really beautiful greens on them. And they're going to get to be about 55 to 60 grams, so they're not quite as big as the pines, but you get the same experience
Absolutely.
as you would with a Pine Island Chahoua. Um, and you're talking hundreds of dollars. You're not talking thousands of dollars for a Chahoua. So
Mhm.
yeah, there it's if people are interested in getting Chahoua, get a mainland. Now you got to make sure you're getting a mainland
I was just
because
going to ask you about this. Explain to the listeners how you would tell. I mean, I'd love to hear your insight on this because it's just, I think it's a mess out there. I personally
yeah,
know people that are breeding mains to Pine Islands, and
yep.
and the people are looking for things and in those Facebook groups trying to identify how is this a Pine Island, a mainland. Explain to the guys. Let us, with all the experience and knowledge you have, I would
Mhm.
love to hear you explain this and tell us about this.
The way that you can tell the difference between a mainland and a Pine Island is you can't. Looking at looking at it, there are Pine Islands that have shorter, stubbier faces. There are mainlands that have kind of a longer snout that people associate with pines. If it's a full-grown adult, then you could look at it and be like, "That's a pine, that's a mainland," just because the size is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
Usually, usually. I mean, I've seen plenty of people who have full-grown Pine Islands that are 50 to 55 grams. And it's not that they're a runt or it just the range of size for Pine Islands is really probably 50 to 75 to 80 grams. You get something above 80, that's a really
It's an odd
exceptional
thing.
it's an exceptionally large Chihuahua. Um, and you're right, there are breeders out there that have crossed mainlands to pines because you can. I mean, it's just like you can with Leachianas. You can cross a mainland animal to an island animal, and you're still going to get a Chahoua. It's just not going to be a pure mainland. It's not going to be a pure Pine Island. So the thing that you have to do, and this applies to really any gecko project. It probably applies to pretty much every single reptile project. Do your research on who you're buying from.
Mm.
Be very deliberate ask questions about lineage and how they can prove that lineage. I've bought Chahoua from people who are like, this gecko came from this person who got it from this person. Those geckos were field collected, so we know exactly where they're from. You're getting an F2, you're getting an F3. We know those geckos are either GT Mainland, or we know that they're Pine Island, because we still know the person who collected the great great grandparents, and these are the great great grandbabies from those. So you've got to ask as many questions as possible, and ultimately you've got to trust the person you're talking to.
Yes.
You've and here's the thing. I mean, if you're asking, if you're a potential buyer and you're asking someone who's selling an animal that's represented as X, and you ask them, how can you prove to me, or what kind of information can you give to me that's going to make me believe that what you're selling is what you're saying it is. And that's not saying that I think you're lying to me. It's just like, give me the peace of mind as someone who's going to spend several $100s, several $1,000s on an animal, that what I'm getting is what I'm paying for is actually what I'm getting. And what they have is what is represented in the ad, or just in conversation or whatever. And they should be able to do that. And when they, if a seller is saying, listen, I got it from so and so, I trust their stuff, this is where they got it from. Okay, if you can trust that that chain of custody of how those geckos and the parents and the grandparents, how they came in. Okay, that's good. Especially if it's all established breeders and people who have been doing it for a while. Their names, their reputation is valuable. They're not going to do something to jeopardize that. But if you're at a show, if you're at a show and somebody has something on the table and they're just like, oh, this is what this is, first question, did you produce it? You didn't produce it? No, that's pretty, but I'm not going to buy it. And did you produce it? Okay, what are the, where'd the parents come from? Okay, what do the parents look like? Who produced those parents? Give me some more information on that. I think sometimes people are maybe a little bit afraid to be a pain in the ass when it comes to buying animals.
They are.
Please ask all the questions.
Right?
I mean, as somebody who does the same thing and makes other sellers' lives miserable on occasion, please give it back to me. Ask me all the questions you want about, like, where did this gecko come from? Who produced that? How do you know the lineage is this?
Absolutely.
Do you have pictures of other siblings that have grown up so I can see what this gecko might look like? Those are all great questions that, yeah, it's going to require some legwork for the person selling it, but damn it, like, we're selling these animals for a lot of money. We should be able to earn our money a little bit.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So I mean, the whole idea of the being able to visually differentiate between a mainland and a Pine Island Chahoua, you really can't. You really have to go on what it was sold to you as, what that breeder's information is on that particular gecko, and that's what you got. We don't have animals. Most people don't have animals that are microchipped. We don't have ways, we don't have an AKC registry that you can, trace lineage per se.
No, don't.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything? Andrew, right? Andrew Gilpin. Have you seen? He did I don't know if it was
I
at
have
the
geckos from him.
symposium. I saw him, heard him talking about a pore count. If I remember correctly, he was saying that mainlands and Pine Islands in the Jalu, in theory, have different rows of pores. That a mainland has like 20 something pores, femoral pores, and I mean, these are just like, I'm just making up numbers.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, he had some information on that. You haven't tried anything like that? I haven't myself either, and I always like mean to. I'm always like, I should check that one day. I should count the pores and take a, like a general number of all of my Pine Islands and just see how many pores they actually have, like a, as a, base number, and then check my mainlands and see if there actually is any difference. But I'd be lying to you if I said I haven't. But there's just so many variants, like you said, so many variables. Like, what's a Troger or Tremper? I'm not sure which one. Who was the European line? Troger or Tremper had the European.
I think it was Tremper.
Now they were like super pink, right? If I remember,
some of them can be, yeah.
See, I saw, I don't know if it was an article or maybe a YouTube video, but they were showing some of them, and they were saying they were mainlands, and I'm like, that looks so Pine Islandy, like a pastel Pine Island. That how
Hmm.
could anyone tell? See, my
Yeah.
theory is that when they came into the hobby, from what I gather, there was not a lot of animals, say 200 animals.
Hmm.
Those
That's
200
probably,
animals,
yeah.
say, went in four different directions. Those
Hmm.
four different people had those animals, started pairing them and breeding them. After
Hmm.
they had already paired them and breed them, they realized that there was a difference in locales. At that
Yep.
point, you already have offspring. So we already have
Hmm.
mixed up babies. Now
Yep.
you're trying to bring it back to the
Hmm.
original form from an outcrossed line anyway. I mean,
Right.
it's just, to me, I don't know that we really even have any true Pine Islands, Rob. And I'm not saying
Yeah.
that to be
No, that's
combative or argumentative or
mhm,
bash anything anyone else says. It's just
mhm,
when I break it down logically, I have to be honest with myself.
mhm.
Do we even really have full Pine Islands anymore or
Yeah.
mainlands anymore? You
Yeah.
know,
That's
but
that's a great point. And it really it applies to localities with Leachianus as well, where
absolutely,
there are some Leachianus that came in that there were two from that locality, and those are the parents to all of them that we have in the hobby right now, because that's all that was field collected.
yeah.
And yet you'll see variances in appearance of that specific locality, and you're like, well, how can these two, if you had, especially if you started off with such a small gene pool, how do you have this much variance in something that's supposedly pure? Stuff happens of
Right, absolutely,
especially, and you're talking about stuff that happened 25, 30 years ago.
yes.
And you're dealing with large groups of geckos that were field collected, brought in, and then you're right, they split up to a bunch of smaller breeders, and then what happened to them from there, you just have to kind of trust the chain of custody of like, okay, and chain of custody, and that the animals were kept separate. They were labeled appropriately. They were always kept appropriately labeled and identified, and never, especially, I mean, particularly with Leachianus. I mean, this was the case with me when I first started breeding Leachianus. Is you didn't have a whole lot of choice sometimes of what you were going to pair up. It was like, okay, well, this is mature. This is mature. If I want to
Mhm.
create, okay, this will work. Um, but I also didn't really have much of a choice in a couple of early pairings that I had, because I'm like, this is all I really have. That happens all the time with breeders of some of this stuff, and you know, yeah, I mean, the idea of like, are there any real pure Pine Island and mainland Chahoua? You could make the argument that they've always been crossed and that they were never really pure for that long. Um, but I think in the end, the most valuable thing that you have is the lineage that you get from the person who produced it, and then doing your due diligence, both in the research and then also in preserving your records when you
That's
produce geckos, to give to your customers so they know exactly what they're getting. So hopefully, like if you're selling something that's pure locality, or you're selling something that's pure Pine Island or pure mainland Chahoua, um, you want to communicate that to the new owner, not just because there's an inherent value in that, but also you're hoping that they can kind of say, okay, this is pure. I should keep this pure going
yes.
forward. And you're giving them that information, and you're giving them kind of that appreciation of what
Mhm.
you have here. What you have here is special,
Yes.
and what you have here is something that, yeah, you maybe paid a little bit more for it because it was pure locality, but there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why you should preserve that going forward. And not everybody does, and I have no problem with people who then cross localities for stuff, as long as everything's properly labeled and everything's
Yeah. Yeah.
communicated.
Yeah.
If
You're
there's
right.
if there's transparency to the buyer, then
No
then I think
locale
that's fine.
specific. I mean, I'd be lying
Yeah,
if I said it doesn't break my heart. I see someone that'll just have the mainland and have a Pine Island, and they're
yeah,
like, "Well, it's the only two I have, and I'm not going to buy another one and wait another 2, 3 years to raise them to do it." And they pair it.
yeah,
It hurts my heart. I'm like, damn,
yeah,
ah. But I mean, who am I to judge?
yeah.
Who am I? As long as they're telling people that it's a
Right.
cross or a no locale, non-locale specific animal.
Yeah,
Maybe they have some goal of some sort that I don't know.
yeah.
But I'm like a purist, Rob. I'm
Mhm.
like there's value in that, you know, like these animals, it's just, it needs to be respected. They need to be treated
Hmm.
as their own thing here, you know,
Yep.
like it's, we
Yep.
can't just mix wash this all up together. In 15 years we really do only just have Chahoua, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I'm trying as hard as I can to keep that separate, and I'm super
Hmm.
adamant about doing it.
Hmm.
But that's a me thing, and I'm not judging anyone out there. I'm just saying
Yeah.
I have my ways.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, the idea of, um, the idea of, um, hold on one second, I'm losing my battery here. The idea of, um, mainland over pines again is, if you're not looking for something that is super high white or super white collar, you know, mainlands have everything that pines have. And so if that's the case, then
And
just
some. And
yeah,
some. The
yeah,
contrast and the pattern on some of these
oh
things.
yeah,
I have
yeah,
a couple mainlands, Rob, that I have a hard time telling myself they're not my favorite in my collection. Like I love some of my mainlands. They're
yeah,
gorgeous.
yep,
They're like these burgundy reds with
hmm,
the black hide. They're gorgeous
yep,
animals.
yeah.
Oh,
I've got one male mainland that I got from Tracy Saltmarsh,
okay.
and he is like sherbet orange with a like pastel green collar.
I want one
It,
so bad. My buddy Kyle over at Coos, he breeds them. He's got a pair, and I don't know where he got them from, but they're just this almost solid, like it's like a marble color, the whole thing, like an
yep,
orange.
yep,
Oh my god, I got to get my hands on one of those. Oh
yep.
man.
I gotta plug this in. I'm running out of power for some reason.
Okay,
So hold 1 second.
absolutely. Hey guys, again, you got to check Rob's page out, man. He breeds some of the most phenomenal animals you will ever see. I mean, he is so strategic with his pairings. Again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's freaking art, man. His animals are art. It's you may pay, you know, but trust you me, it's worth it. It's worth it. You know, just because someone doesn't have this crazy big name and isn't on every YouTube channel and page doesn't mean that this isn't top notch stuff. I'm telling you, it's top notch stuff.
All right. Now I got more power. I'm good.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like thank you, man. I really do. I didn't get a chance to, but I want to thank you for, you know, coming on here, getting us the time to tap your brain and
Hmm.
talk about this stuff. You know,
Yeah.
I really think that these species don't get enough time in the spotlight, if you will. You
Hmm.
know, so
Yeah.
many people focused on crested geckos and
Hmm.
white collar chihuahuas. We almost
Hmm.
overlook all the other things that are available. You know,
Yeah.
just because you can't afford a $10,000 white collar chewy doesn't mean you can't have the animal, right? It's
Right.
not the collar that makes the animal the animal. I mean, it
Hmm.
definitely contributes to the physical appearance, but
Hmm.
there's so much more to a chihuahua. The you
Yeah.
know the inquisitiveness, the intelligence, the ease of care, the
Hmm.
you know how active they are, everything like you said before, man. They
Yep.
are like the perfect pet animal, and anybody that
Hmm.
listens to the podcast knows I'm always saying that chihuahuas mark every box in
Yep.
my eyes, other than like Rob had mentioned. Yes, the bugs. If you're not going to feed bugs, or you're one of
Hmm.
those type of people, you're better off sticking to, I don't even want to say a crested gecko, because I believe that all of these things need bugs,
Yeah.
but chihuahua's not the way. These things are clearly predators.
Yeah.
They're clearly hunters. You know,
Yep.
I put mix in with these guys because it's one way that I feel comfortable, you know, adding extra supplements, you know, so I want
Hmm.
them to just have like the macros and micros that I maybe not be giving them in my feeders.
Hmm.
But Rob, they don't touch it. Like once in a blue moon, a female that's, carrying a clutch may just eat everything in sight, but
Yeah.
they typically they don't want to be bothered with it, man. Like they
Yeah.
just they won't eat the crested gecko mix. I just cleaned them out today. I pulled out 12 full things of like dried up mix and threw in a couple dozen crickets in every pairing, you know. They're
Yeah.
all going crazy. They're all bouncing off the walls in there. Didn't eat the mix.
I think some of that is seasonal.
Hmm,
So we're in
makes
winter right
sense.
now,
Huh.
and I think that um, mine tend to not eat as much of either for the gecko diets that I feed for Chahoua. I use Pangea. I use Black Panther Zoological.
Okay.
I've tried some Repashy with some decent
That's
success,
incredible.
and some of the Leap and Leachies diets as well. All
Okay.
of them have varying degrees of success. The staple that I use, I like the Pangea Growth and Breeder formula,
Okay.
and the Black Panther Zoological, their original
Never
formula.
tried
Those
that. I've heard
it's
nothing
it's
bad about it.
it's a really well made diet.
Yeah. Okay.
And Caden, the guy who runs the company, he's a really good guy. He's very into very all natural stuff. It's a
Love
very
it.
well made diet. Um, and what was I saying? But yeah, so I think seasonally, I think the Chahoua really prefer more bugs in the winter. And they're going to slow down a little bit anyways. Do you
Yeah.
cool your geckos in the winter?
I was just gonna. I was just gonna ask you. We'll get
Yeah,
into that a little bit.
yeah.
Now I feel like an asshole saying this, but
Hmm.
I don't, Rob. I
I
haven't.
know. I know some people
I've
don't.
let the room get to like, because I keep a whole room. I control a
Yeah,
whole room.
yeah.
So it'd be hard to let it get too cool because I live in the house and it's the central air that heats it. So I really can't. But I've never no, I've never let it get lower than like 70.
So
No.
I keep my main my collection's in the basement of my house, which makes it easier to let it get cool.
Okay.
And the collection that I have, part of again being deliberate about what I keep,
Yeah.
diamond pythons can get nice and cold. The colubrid species I keep can get nice and cold in the winter. So I cycle all of my geckos to where in the winter they'll get down to about 58.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
they'll get down to about 58 at night, and during the day, you gradually bring them down. Usually, what I do, so the strategy that I do with breeding Chahoua and cycling them, and I do the same thing with gargoyles, and I do the same thing with Leachianus, is the beginning of November, I start decreasing the temperature in the room, and sometimes that just means turning off the heat to this room. Sometimes it just means turning off any basking lights that I have and just letting the room ambient be a little bit lower.
Okay.
So typically for Chahoua, Leachianus, I keep them all the same, where the temperature in the main part of the year, so summer and the late spring and early fall, ambient in the cage is going to be about 74 to 75, with a warm area that's going to be closer to 80. A
Okay.
basking spot, whether it's a radiant heat panel, a puck light, or an infrared heat bulb, something that's going to provide a warm spot for them. And then at night, I let it get down to about 68 or 70 degrees, even in the summer at night, if it's that cool. When we have really warm summers, my
Yeah.
room's not getting below 75 or 76 at night, and the humidity is going to stay nice and high anyway, so that's fine.
Basement's
But
clutch. No, you're lucky with the basement, man.
basements
That's
basements are
awesome.
basements are perfect. So start cooling down beginning of November, and by the time I get to Thanksgiving, I'm turning off any heating devices, and then again the ambient temperature in the room is still going to be slowly coming down to where once I get to Christmas is when I'm kind of like starting like the bottom of my temperatures. So this coming weekend, I'll let it get down to about 60 degrees at night, and I'll slowly go down a little bit further than that to get. I've had years where I'll have a couple weeks where the nighttime temperature in the room will be down to 56, and they're fine. I stopped feeding any mix for the Chahoua, and even the Leachianus, I stopped feeding them altogether for a couple of weeks at least.
Okay.
Um, and then once I start feeding them again, I'll maybe feed them once a week, on kind of the shoulder seasons. They don't lose any weight, and if anything, especially the Leachies, they tend to gain weight, just
Mhm.
because their metabolism really shuts down. They've got a lot of reserves. Make sure they have water, and they just kind of they just nothing happens to them. And then I'll start bringing them up. Usually the end of January, first week of February, start bringing the temperatures back up to where usually by mid February to late February, I'm back in like my normal temperatures. So what I've learned with Chahoua that's different than Lichianus is you have to pair them earlier in the season.
Okay, I've heard
Um,
that.
where the Lichianus, I typically will pair Lichianus if it's a new pair, because once they're paired, they stay together year round.
Okay, good.
But for Lichianus, I'll typically pair them mid to late December or even into mid January when it's nice and cold. That tends to reduce the chances of them killing each other. Um, and with Chahoua, and these are tips that I got from Paul at Rack House, really kind of said, yeah, you got to put them together earlier. Chahoua,
Brilliant. He really is. I've listened to him talk before. He's got some
he's
experience. Paul's yeah.
he's fantastic to talk to. He's a great guy, and he's again someone who really taught me the value of just being in tune with your animals and just trying to observe behavior in animals and just go using that as your experience and as your as your barometer on how you're gonna treat them and what the room should do. Um, but with Chahoua, I pair them as early as the end of October to mid-November for new pairings. Um, and I think either they start breeding earlier or they just kind of need to get to know each other a little bit more.
Yeah.
And breeding doesn't really take place right away, but you pair those a little bit earlier than you do with Leachianus. The
Okay.
strategy that I do with pairing, and I do this with Leachianus as well, and I think it works most of the time, is I always introduce the female to the male's cage, never the other way around. When
Really? Okay.
females with Leachianus, I think this is really important. With Chahoua, I've done the same thing and I haven't had any issues with it, so I think it's probably somewhat similar. So females tend to be far more territorial than the males, and it's because they're the ones that are laying the eggs and protecting the eggs.
Yeah.
So if they're going to have any sort of territorial defensiveness, we call it aggression, but really it's territorial defensiveness. If they're going to have any of that, it's their territory, and you introduce an animal into that territory, their natural response is going to be to fight and defend.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're putting a female into a territory that is not hers, she's
Birth.
immediately not on the defensive.
Makes sense.
Where the male is like, hey, I'm just looking to breed, and hey, great, you're here. This is good.
Yeah.
So it's to me that tends to be a much smoother introduction process. I don't switch bark around or do any of that. I don't think it really makes much of a difference. On occasion, I've introduced them into a neutral setting to kind of see, okay, let's put them in a neutral setting. See, is there any, do they immediately try to kill each other, or is there just kind of some initial curiosity? Put them back in their original cages, and then put the female into the male's cages on a different day. I think a neutral introduction can't hurt.
Okay.
But I don't really see any benefit of like swapping cork or anything like that. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a gecko and there's a new strange piece of cork that's put into your territory and it smells like another gecko, but there's not another gecko around, that's got to be damn confusing to
Yeah.
be like,
It's maybe almost intimidating. It's insecure, giving an insecure feeling.
yeah. Whereas if just like, okay, let's introduce you to another gecko. Okay, that went well. Okay, now this gecko's in your territory. Deal with that. And
Mm.
then as keepers, we all know we have sleepless nights where we sit in the chair in the room with the lights off with a flashlight going, okay, please nobody kill each other tonight.
Yeah. See, I
I,
genuinely believe too, Rob, that these things have a great sense of smell. See, with my
yeah.
lychees, I've only got a small amount. I've got 6 of them, and I
Mm-hmm,
raised them all together, all on top of each other, arguably, for a
mm-hmm,
reason. When the age came, I almost wanted them to know each other's scent. I wanted it to be a common thing. So I kept them very close together their whole lives until I paired them at 3 years old.
mm-hmm,
And that's it. Well, probably close to about, I want to say 4 years old, but they're still in the 3 in a couple of weeks they would have been 4 years old. No incident whatsoever. But I didn't have a problem, and I really believe that they knew each other from being together for that long. They were literally on top of each other for 4 years.
so
You
they
know?
weren't in the same cage, they were just in proximity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like I genuinely
Well,
believe that they could smell each other. That it was a kind of a common. I don't know. I could be overreaching, but I think that if they can smell a rotten fruit from a tree hollow
Hmm.
on a branch 15 feet away, how do they not know that there's another gecko within a certain proximity of them?
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, and you can't rule out pheromones.
yes, absolutely.
Particularly with males and females, where if the female is emitting certain pheromones,
Hmm.
it you could make the argument it's going to affect the entire room, and that's
Yes.
going to get all the other males fired up and things like that. So that's there's that theory as well.
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, once geckos are paired, as long as things go well, just leave them alone.
Mhm.
They're together for life. You don't have to remove them unless something bad happens. Um, and that's really it.
So
What size
back
caging
to
do you?
I right now I just put these leeches in these cages. A buddy of mine gave me three 36 by 18 by 18 by 18 cages, these glass terrariums.
Yep, yep,
And I had them in 64 quart totes, these big old plastic things, and
yep.
it's cool, but I got them in these glass things now that I planted full blown vivariums. They look like they're in a jungle, and they
Yep.
they really love it. They're loving it right now. I haven't quite figured out how I'm gonna get eggs out, but they're happy and they're healthy.
Yep.
And I don't know. Again, like I said, I have to figure out how to get eggs. When I built the terrariums, I kind of, did all the drainage layer and all
Yep.
that crap. But I
Hmm.
built one super high mound in the back corner, hoping that maybe
Hmm.
the females will use that. And I only put two
Yep.
pairs together. I still have two others that aren't paired up, but
Hmm.
the two pairs I have are. And we'll see. Like I said, I'm not worried about them. I've collected eggs from the one laid duds. One of my
Hmm.
pairs laid duds, and she didn't give a crap.
Yep.
They were fertile, Rob. I don't know, they were parthogenic. She laid two eggs. One of them had the cherry inside of it and everything. I wanted
Yep.
blue in the egg. It never lasted, but it would look fertile to me. She was never with a male. One of the craziest things I've ever seen is a parthogenic egg. I can
Yep.
only imagine people that hatch them, but she didn't bother me. She wasn't, so I don't know. Maybe I can get in there and dig around or something. I just have to. I'm super observant of my animals anyway. I'm sure I could tell when she's looking to lay. I'll
Hmm.
just have to keep my eyes out, I guess.
They'll Leachianis. So difference between Leachianis and Chahoua too. So
Mm,
Leachianis, what I find is the females will dig practice holes for the day or
okay.
two before they lead. But
Okay.
the day or two before they lay, they'll dig some practice holes so you can kind of see like where they're looking at.
Yeah.
In that type of setup, and I have cages that are just like that too, where it's kind of a tall glass
Mm,
bioactive type setup. The trick to know where they're laying their eggs is to get leaf litter and put leaf
okay.
litter on the bottom, so it's easy to see. Okay, all the
Right.
leaves are
Yeah.
out of the leaves are disturbed there. This must be where she buried them. Because
I can do that.
I've tried lay boxes with some success,
Mhm.
but a lot of times it's just you got to look at the geckos every day and be like, okay,
Yeah.
why is that part of the cage disturbed? Sometimes they'll dig up a plant, put them in there. Typically, though, once you figure out where she lays her eggs, she will lay them there all the time.
Cool.
Um, I don't
Good
find
to
that to
know.
be the case with the Chahoua. The Chahoua sometimes will lay them in different spots. Um, Chahoua don't bury their eggs
I was just gonna
typically.
ask you, Max. Mine haven't. Mine, I've only got, like I
Nope.
said, four clutches. None of
Yep.
them have been buried in anything.
Yep. The only actually, you know what? The only Chua eggs that I found that were buried were bad ones. Um,
Really?
yeah, but the ones that were good were typically like tucked under a piece of cork, but not
Yeah.
buried, tucked behind a plant,
Mhm.
um, laid like inside a planter, but not buried. And typically the female will be there, and this cute, lovely gecko that you're like, oh, isn't she sweet? She is a demon for a
Turn
year,
into
for
real
like a day or two.
tokens.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's very much
Mhm.
like it's like just mouth
Uh-huh.
gaping. She'll lunge at
Mhm.
you. She will bite. I mean, it's just like, whoa, you
Yeah.
are very different right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool that they protect their eggs that way.
How do
Um,
you feel about the cold? What did you feel that the cold chilling your animals? Does it? Have you ever not chilled them? Do you feel that it leads to a better season of production? Like 'cause now I'm super concerned. Like I've never talked to anybody with your amount of knowledge and experience with these things. Boris is like my go-to guy. I got into everything I got from him, and he's pretty much like my go-to for everything. He has a huge
Hmm.
collection, and I
Yeah.
never really even asked him. Does he chill? Does he not chill? Like, do you find that it leads to a better season? Should I be doing it? Is it healthier for my animals?
I think yes and yes.
Really?
So I in years that I have not significantly cooled the room, I've had poor production. And in years where I've gone really cold, I've had my best
Mm,
production. Um,
okay. All right.
in the wild, so if you think like, okay, is it good for them? I think it is. In the wild, they are going to experience a winter cool down and a very significant winter cool down. There are people who have been in New Caledonia in winter, like out, not in the, so if you look at like a weather app that's going to
Yeah.
show you like what the weather is in Noumea, Noumea is a city. It's not where the geckos are.
That's the only one
Geckos
that
are out.
shows up on my thing too, because I
Yeah,
have it on my
right.
weather thing, and it's like, damn, it's
Yeah,
the only place I can get
yeah,
on my weather app is Numea. You're right,
yeah.
absolutely.
And that's not where the geckos are. The geckos are out in the woods. And so the people who have been out in the field in New Caledonia during the winter, I talked to someone who's just like, we had frost on our tent one morning. It gets down into the 40s easily out in the woods,
Wow,
out in
it's the
the
first time
forest
I've
where the
heard
geckos
that.
are in the winter. Now, are the geckos experiencing 40 degrees? No. They're probably experiencing, when it's 40 degrees outside, they're tucked down in a tree hollow where they're going
Mhm.
to have some natural insulation.
Yeah,
Decaying wood's going to give off a little bit of heat as
warmth,
well.
absolutely.
But they're tucked down in there, but they're experiencing cooler temperatures than I think a lot of people expect. They're easily experiencing temperatures in the 50s. And I think a it gives them a little bit of a break where they're not having to actively hunt and forage as much. They can rest, they can recover from the breeding season before, and then when they
Mm.
come out of that, I think that it's the same thing with snakes and stuff like that. I think when they come out of that winter cool down, it triggers sex hormones where naturally the animal is just like, okay, we made it through winter, we've eaten some food, now it's time to
Yeah,
breed.
makes
Um,
sense.
and the experience that I've had with my geckos is the seasons that I have not significantly cooled them down in the winter, I've had less productive um, pairings, and in seasons where I've had a really good cool down and maybe even had a few weeks where it's like, ooh, we've got even a little bit colder than I would
Mm,
typically go. I had fantastic production those years.
really?
Yeah, so it's I we had a we had an ice storm here about 12 years ago, and I was just starting to breed Leachianas, but the majority of my collection were still colubrids. I had a large milk snake collection. So we had a big ice storm in December, and we lost power for 11 days. And my snake room got down to about 48 degrees, and I was like, and so we had no power. It was. I think I still have PTSD from it because it was awful. It was like we had no power, and then we had another snowstorm, and it was just we had no power, we had no
Uh,
heat. I'm on a well, so we had no water. So it was just there was, yeah, it was not fun at all. But that following spring, all of my animals produced just fantastic. It was like they came out of that really extra cold period. And granted, it was only
yeah,
for 11 days. I didn't lose
yeah,
any animals, nothing got sick or anything like that, but they had a little bit of a shock to their system.
yeah.
And that that year, that year following the ice storm, it was a really good production year.
Well, Mick, you're not the only
So,
one to say that. Lots of people, will swear by it. Swear by
yeah,
a deep cooling. You know, to do whatever to set off the new
yeah,
season. I mean, humans, even us, like, maybe not me, but when I was training hard, but a lot of like these, athletes and stuff will get that what's like the cryogenic stuff. They sit in these tanks and they almost freeze
yeah,
they drop their body temperatures to
yeah,
a certain degree, and it's
hmm,
supposed to be great for like cell rejuvenation and all types of
hmm,
stuff.
yeah,
There's proven science
yeah,
to cell health, to molecular health and cold temperatures, and there's probably a lot more to it that we're not knowing, and just
right.
Damn, man, I'm kicking myself in the butt right now, man. I really,
Well, I don't think I don't think it's absolutely necessary because there are plenty of breeders all over the country who live in warm climates. I mean, look at, David down at, Tiki's
yeah,
in Florida.
yeah, you're right.
He's in South Florida, but he breeds a ton of New Caledonian species. And I know he's not getting cooled down to the 50s because it never
Yeah,
gets
right.
close to, unless I mean, yeah, unless he's got a room where he's keeping his animals that he's putting an air conditioner in, that he's dropping the temperature
Oh,
down into the low 60s maybe. That's possible. But it's so is it absolutely necessary? No. There are plenty of people that do it without a cool down. But I think it's beneficial.
that's cool. I understand. I one thing about this New Caledonian stuff that I really, really, really love is how differently everybody does the same thing. Like we all have our different ways, because we all live in our own different microclimates too, if you will.
Hmm.
Like you're just saying with David down in South Florida, he's doing the same thing we're doing, but totally different because of where he is. You got
Yeah.
people in California, the Midwest, Canada, all over the globe that are doing, we're all trying to find different ways to do the same thing. And to
Hmm.
me, it's just so interesting. I love hearing how everybody does their little things.
Hmm.
I love all the little differences that everyone does to achieve the same goal, if you will.
I think that's the big appeal to all the New Caledonian species, though, is that they're a very forgiving species when it comes to
Oh,
both keeping and to some degree breeding, but it definitely keeping. And that's why they're so popular. I mean,
yeah.
they check off a lot of boxes, but one of those boxes has to be how easy are they to keep, and they are very easy to keep. I know people who provide no supplemental heating. That's not something that I advocate for or not something that I practice, but I know people that do that and the geckos do okay. Maybe they grow a little bit slower. Um, maybe they're not quite as active, but
Yeah.
they do okay at room temperature. I provide supplemental heating to all my geckos and because I see them use it. And I'm like, okay, if they're
What do
using it.
you? How do you feel about UVB?
So in the past couple of years, I've experimented with using UVB. So not all of my geckos have UVB. I use UVB in cages that I have live plants in. And it's kind of a direction that I've headed in the past like 4 or 5 years of my goal is for all of my adult cages for both gargoyles, Chahoua, Saracenorum, and Leachianus, for all of them to have at least one live plant in the cage. It doesn't have to be a bioactive cage. It can just be a regular cage and they have a pot with plant in it. Um, and in order for that plant to do okay, it's going to need some type of full spectrum lighting and a UVB light in addition to that. It can't hurt, and the idea that like, well, these geckos are nocturnal, so they don't need UVB. Well, there are plenty of people who have gone, the people who have gone to New Caledonia and done field studies. Yes, these are geckos that live in tree hollows. They tend to be mostly um, you know, nocturnal or at least most active at dusk and dawn time. Um, they're getting exposed to some UVB. If they're basking on a tree branch and it's dappled sunlight, they're getting some UVB. There's absolutely nothing wrong with providing UVB to your geckos. But there are plenty of people who have never done it and their geckos are perfectly fine. So it's not necessarily, I don't think it's a universal requirement. But I think it's worth trying. I think it's worth seeing it. And again, it's kind of, in your own collection, you can do experiments of like, okay, these geckos over
Absolutely.
here, they have UVB. These geckos over here are raised exactly the same, but they do not have UVB. What differences do I see? Um,
Absolutely.
and right now, I'm not really seeing much in the way of differences
I
in
don't either.
behavior or growth. But I know I'm not causing harm. So I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, well, I've got the bulbs. I might as well use them until they're
Yeah.
gone. And will I replace them? I probably will,
Mm.
because I don't think I've put enough time and study into seeing whether they are beneficial. But I know they're not
Right.
harmful. The
Yeah.
thing to be careful about though, so the thing to be careful about with UVB, so you can get different strength UVB bulbs. You see the 2.5, 5.0, 10.0, all these different, and that's very important to pay attention to, because you can damage your gecko or whatever reptile, you can damage their eyes if you put a UVB bulb that is too bright. So with our geckos, these are geckos that are not out in bright sunlight. They are in basically like a shady forest type scenario. So yeah, so you want to make sure that you have a UVB bulb that is a low intensity. Arcadia, I think, has their forest dweller or jungle
Yeah,
dawn
shade
or something
dweller,
like
something like that. I
shade
hear
dweller.
great
Yeah,
things. Great, 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 great
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, so that's a responsible path to take if you're going to be using UVB, because you can, I've read people say that you can seriously damage their eyesight,
I've heard
if
that
they're
too.
if
Yeah.
they're exposed to too bright sunlight, too bright UVB. So again, it's things that you can do your research and then
Mhm.
do some experimentation that is not going to cause harm, but you're looking to see if it causes benefit.
Yeah. What steps are you taking, if any, for your breeding female Chahuas? Are you doing anything to avoid the sunken hip syndrome and squiggly tail thing? Are you doing anything special? Like, walk us through what you do to prep a female for breeding season, if you don't mind.
So the amount that I feed my Chahoua, they get fed 3 times a week. So they get fed a mix twice a week, and then they get bugs once a week. Leading up to breeding season, and particularly when I'm pairing them for the first time, I will add in a extra feeding day of bugs. And
Nice.
all of the bugs are dusted with a calcium powder. I've used Mineral. I've used RepCal. I've used several different calcium powders that are out there. They're all fine. Um, and so all the bugs get dusted with that. I gut load all my insects as well, by a good quality insect feed, to gut load your insects and provide them with fresh vegetable cuttings and clippings, things like that. Um, just be aware of, like, okay, what you're feeding to this insect, you want them to be in optimal nutritional condition, because that's what your gecko is getting. I'll also, particularly the dubia, any gecko food that doesn't get eaten gets thrown into the dubia cage, and the dubia will eat all that. It's like
Love it.
you'll take a plastic, little condiment cup that you use for feeding your Lichianas. Any
Mm.
any extra food that's left in there, when you pull it out of the cage, you throw it in the dubia bin. The next day, that cup is picked clean.
Gone. Clean, clean. Like ready
Yeah,
to go back in the pile.
like
Clean.
basically, yep, you can go to the recycling bin now. You're nice and clean. So yeah, so what I do for the females is I make sure they get an extra serving of bugs, and then once they're paired up, I always try to have that there's at least an extra serving of bugs during the week, and then because they're paired, you're not watching them the whole time to see like who's eating, who's not eating. I will do weight checks.
Okay.
So I will do, I'll take her out, do a weight check for her at the beginning of the season, see how she's doing midway. Again, just also, doing a good eye check, just like, okay,
Yeah.
how does she look? Take her
Mhm.
out and hold her. Does she feel kind of soft? Does she feel kind of, limp? How strong does she feel? Stuff like that. Um, but for the most part, it's do a weight check, make sure they have an extra serving of bugs during breeding season, and everything else is normal. If they're in good condition when they go in, they're going to be able to handle it fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I find it so odd that so many people, and there's a lot, Rob, that so many people just accept that calcium crash as the norm.
Right.
It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts when I see it and people saying that it's normal. I'm like, no, like what are you doing to your animal? Like,
I,
please.
I think what happens with that, I think unfortunately a lot of times people think that they have to breed the animal that they bought for breeding.
Absolutely. You're right. You're right. You're right. You're
And
not
I
everyone's worth it once they grow up. You're
yeah.
made better off doing the hobby and the species justice by not pairing an animal.
Yeah, because I mean, and I understand the difficulty of that decision of, like, if you spend $1,000 on an animal that you're like, this is going to be one of my breeders, and it gets to be breeding age, you're like, this isn't quite what I expected this animal to be. to then make the decision, be like, I am not going to breed that animal. I'm going to either keep it as a pet, or I'm going to sell it to somebody and say, listen, this should be a pet. This should not be a breeder.
Yeah.
That's a hard decision to make, because you've invested time, energy, and a lot of money in something that you thought was going to produce for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to make that hard decision and be like, this isn't happening.
Have
And
you
then
ever had
some,
it happen to you? Have you ever had it happen to you? Have you ever had to make that choice?
I have. And it was after I bred her for one season and really was not
Yeah.
pleased with the result. I was like, I'm not going to breed her again. She didn't handle it well. And the offspring that she produced, I thought, were a little bit smaller. The offspring, they turned out okay because the male was really good. But I was like, I'm like, she's not something that I would want to continue producing. I ended up selling her as a pet. And, did the person I sell it to, breed her? I am not aware that they did. I asked them not to. I said, listen, I can't force you to keep this animal or to breed it or whatever. But the reason why I'm selling it this cheap is because I don't think it should be in the breeding pool. It didn't produce to the degree that I wanted, and I just think that it's not the quality that we need to put out there. I think that's that's the thing that's worth bringing up too, is that there are a decent, it's not like crested geckos where there are tens and tens of thousands of crested geckos that are everywhere that you could buy. We don't have that situation with Chahoua.
Thank
but
God.
but there are plenty of Chahoua if you want one.
Yeah.
And they are they are a little bit of a niche species for people who want to have a gecko for a pet. They don't have all of the morphs, thank God. They don't have all of the morphs that tend to drive certain breeding plans and certain interests. You have certain, traits that you can breed for color and pattern, things like that. But these are not recessive morphs. That was one of the hard lessons that I had when I was breeding snakes, is the morph game and the race to a certain morph, and how it detracts from what you liked about the animal originally, where it just turns into a race of who can get to, when I was breeding Honduran milk snakes, the race then was to a pearl, which is a triple homozygous animal. So it's an albino, an anthristic, and a hypo all in one.
Really?
So it's.
I don't think I've ever seen one.
I mean,
Well, not that morph. They're a beautiful, beautiful snake to begin with. Those Hondurans are gorgeous animals.
they're awesome. They're awesome. But yeah, so the pearls are like, it's like a very cream colored snake. Sometimes they have like a very pink bubblegum pattern to them, or maybe a very pale yellow pattern.
Okay.
I don't. To me, it takes everything out of the Honduran that I liked about Hondurans. Color, pattern, contrast. None of that was there anymore. And I look at Honduran milk snakes now, and when I was breeding them back in the early 2000s, from like 2000 to like 2005 or so, we had tangerine albinos, we had tricolor albinos, and there were hypos, and we just started getting anthristics as well. And one of the things that I really liked about Hondurans, and what I would do when I was selling them at shows, is comparing them to corn snakes. In that, if you want a baby snake that's going to be big enough to take a large pinky and will eat for you consistently, then get a Honduran, don't get a corn snake. Because they were just a much more robust animal compared to a lot of the corn snakes that you would see. It's not knocking corn snakes; just corn snake babies are much smaller. But the Hondurans that I had, the adults, were 6 feet plus. They were giant. They were
I didn't even know they
huge
got
Hondurans.
that big. Wow.
Oh God, yeah. One of my anthristic males was 6.5 feet, and he was like that big around. He was just
I had
huge.
no idea they got that big, Rob. Holy crap.
I mean, so I have black milk snakes. One of my black milk snake males is close to 7 feet. They are just they can get really, really massive. And I think what happened is over the years there was a ton of inbreeding that went on for a lot of the different morphs. And that's why it's very difficult to find Hondurans now that are over 4.5 feet. A lot
Right.
of them are like full grown, like, oh, it's 3.5 feet. And I'm like, that's not really the Hondurans that I
See, that's
remember.
what I know. Yeah, that's like what I've seen. I've never kept them,
Yeah,
but I'm a fanatic of everything with scales.
yeah,
But yeah, I didn't know that, man. That's
yeah.
awesome.
And they
Huh,
and
interesting.
a lot of the Hondurans now, they tend to be very temperamental, kind of spazzy, and just kind of not.
Really?
And all of mine, even from babies, were very big, very calm, very confident snakes.
Mhm.
Um, they wouldn't bite and stuff like that. And a lot of people now, they who keep Hondurans, they're like, yeah, it's not really the same snake anymore.
Mhm.
But I mean, that's where we're lucky, I think, with Chahoua, and gargoyles and leachianas for the most part. I mean, you have
Yeah,
melanistics with leachianas, but we don't have this morph game. We don't have
yeah,
this race to some type of triple homozygous, something or other recessive, where
yeah.
we're forced to do a ton of inbreeding,
Breeding.
um, and inbreeding for defective genes. I mean, that's what recessive morphs are. These are defective
I tell
genes,
people
and
mutations. They're messed up genes.
yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes, yeah, you create something that's really pretty, but are you also creating something that has neurological issues? Are you also creating something that has, that it's going to have a greater, um, proportion of its babies that fail to thrive?
Yeah,
So it's, you know, that's where we're lucky with Chahoua. With Chahoua, we
absolutely.
have, you know, Chahoua, if you are smart about raising your animals correctly, if you're getting them from a dependable source that
Mhm.
has large, healthy, adults that produce the babies, and then you raise those babies correctly, you know, they're solid animals. And,
Mhm.
I can say the same thing with gargoyles, and the same thing with Lucianas.
Yeah,
It's, we don't have to worry about a lot of the recessive genes,
yeah.
when it comes to the morph game. You know, melanistics, um, with Leachianus, those have recently, in the past like 4 or 5 years, kind of increased in
Absolutely.
numbers. And I think those are a little bit more of a naturally occurring morph that you would see
Mhm.
anyways. Um,
Really? Okay.
and it's you know I produced a couple,
I was
this
just gonna
year and one
say you
last year.
produced a few, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
on
yeah,
accident.
beautiful,
Yeah, on
beautiful,
accident.
beautiful,
Yeah, those
beautiful.
were on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man, what a that
yeah,
talk about a gift, a surprise, a blessing, and oh my God, that's like hitting the
yeah,
lottery, man.
yeah,
Better than hitting the lottery. Holy
yeah,
crap.
yeah. But it's, you know other than being really dark, I didn't really see a
Mm.
ton of difference in them, except, the skin does feel different. They feel a little bit
Really.
soft. The skin feels a little bit softer.
They almost look a little velvety when I look at
Yeah,
them. They
yeah.
look different.
And I've talked to
Okay.
other breeders. I've talked to other breeders who have produced melanistics who have reported a little bit of difficulty sometimes with shedding,
Really.
and they can maybe be a little bit more susceptible to drier conditions. So you have to really make sure you have to watch the humidity with them. So maybe there is a little bit of a defectiveness that goes along with just that increase in pigment.
So
Um,
that animal that you hatched out, that last one that you posted, that Mel,
yep.
is it? Did you? So you didn't know that the parents were hets, or
Nope.
what are they? What are they? Kogus? Where are these Mels coming from? Like naturally occurring, or like where are
They're
they
in.
popping up from?
They're in a lot of different collections, and I think they're in a lot of different collections, especially with GTs, because I think that there were some animals that were het that nobody knew, and
Yeah.
most Leachianus breeders, we've crossed a whole bunch of different GT localities.
Yeah.
Most of us have kept GTs pure as far as these are 100% GT, but
Yeah.
again, it's like we're crossing a type A to a type C, or a Kogus to this, or whatever. So I don't think you can necessarily pinpoint where, which locality the melanistics came from. However, the mels that I produced, one was an F1 Dumbea that I got from Steve Simelli. And I paired that to an A to C to Mount Cogis that I got from Philippe de Vostrele.
So I think
Ne-
it's that Kogus where it's coming from, but
well,
uh,
it would have to be the Dumbea.
Yeah, I
Be,
know.
be,
I'm just like I keep seeing it, and it's always the
I,
Kogus
yeah,
involved. But
yeah.
it could be. It could just be the
It could just
you
be
would know
something
way
that's
more
kind of,
than I would.
it
Yeah.
could just be something that's kind of naturally there. But as far as I know, I'm the only person that has produced a male from a Dumbaya.
I
Um,
think I don't
and
know anyone else either. That's what I'm saying.
and I think
It's
there's only I think like 4 Dumbaya that were in the hobby, and there's more that are out there now from people who produced them. And I got mine directly
yeah.
from Steve, and there's a really cool story about where they came
You
from
can
and
trust
everything.
that, then. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So I know exactly what they are, but
Yeah.
when I got that baby,
Mhm.
I never knew it was Mel, and that pair had produced I think 16 babies that all were normal until that Mel popped out last year. And I was like, what the heck is this? This came out of nowhere. And then this year they produced 2 more. So I'm like, all right, yep, they're definitely het Mel. But I didn't know I didn't know the parents were het Mel. I talked to Steve. He's like, yeah, I didn't know that the Dembea was het Mel, but you've produced 3, so it's
So he
obviously het
hasn't
Mel.
popped anything else out then? He hasn't popped any mills out of anything unexpectedly? That would drive me nuts. I'd
Not
have to.
from not from. I don't think he's produced any from the Dembea, because he had told me that he was pretty sure that I was the only person who had produced Mel's that had Dembea lineage. Um,
Huh.
so I don't know if I'm going to be able to
It's
do it.
exciting.
It well,
It's
it was
exciting.
exciting. It was exciting, but it was also something that I didn't keep them. I sold them because I
Really?
the Mel's. I really like the dark morphs. I like the look of the dark
Mm.
morphs. And you know, the Mel's, they're wicked expensive. And to me, I'm like, okay, if I keep these, then that means I'm gonna have to start a new project that's focused on Mel's. And I'm like, do I really want to invest that much? Because I couldn't just keep my Mel's and then breed my Mel's. I wasn't
Yeah,
gonna do
yeah.
that.
You have to, yeah.
And I'm
Good
and I'm like,
trading, but
well, I ended up trading one for a really nice Chahoua.
really?
Yeah, yeah. I ended up trading for a really nice high white Pine Island Chahoua.
Okay. All right.
And then I sold the other two.
Yeah.
And you know, part of me is just like, well, I could always, if I really wanted to have Mel's, I could produce them again.
Yeah.
Um, maybe because currently that pair is not. That's my one pair that is not wanting to get along. So yeah,
Really?
yeah. They've always been a pair that has fought a lot. He ate her tail 2 years ago. Last year, she ate one of his toes.
Oh,
And then
God.
this year she ate his tail twice. She ate his tail like mid-season, and then as it started growing back, she ate the nub. And I'm like, all right, and he started looking a little worse for the wear too. I'm like, all right, now we gotta separate you. I
So
have a
you really
really
pull them apart?
I did.
Yeah.
I have, and they're a pair that every season I would have to intervene in
Mm,
fights, and I have a really high tolerance for damage and fighting with Leachianas. A lot of people, they see like one fight and they're like, "That's it, I got to separate them." I don't do that. I really try to keep them together because I think fighting's a natural thing that happens with
yeah.
them.
I
But
agree.
you got to make a decision of like, is this fight going to lead to some really bad damage? Um, I'll come in and they'll be on each other's throat. She'll be on his stomach or whatever. And the strategy that I do with them, and honestly, with Shahu, I would take the same strategy where if I go in the room at night, and anybody who keeps new cow species during breeding season, you're always going into your room at night because you're checking on the stuff that's paired, checking on behaviors. That's when they're most active, so that's when you can kind of get an idea to see how they're doing. So if I see animals that are fighting, like a pair that's fighting, I will, like, for leechies, it's easy. They're jaw locked
Yeah.
or they're on each other's throat or something like that. I'll put on a pair of gloves, and then I will reach in the cage, put my
Mm.
thumb in each of their mouth to kind of break them
Oh,
apart,
yeah.
keep them in the cage together. Take a
Okay.
sprayer, spray the cage down with water, close the cage, leave the room. Wait a half an hour, come back in and check on them again. If they're right back at each other again, I'll repeat.
Okay.
Separate them, leave them in the same cage, spray them down again, leave the room, come back in a half an hour. If I come back the third time and they're still like that, I'll separate them. I'll take the female out, put her in a separate cage for the night to chill. The next morning, she goes right back into the cage. Usually that does it. Very rarely have I had to go to that option of like removing her to a separate cage. Usually just separating. I think separating, but keeping them in the same cage and then spraying them down with water. It's like a reset.
Yeah.
It's like they're like, okay, you know, we got caught up in what we're doing. Now we just got sprayed with water. Okay, you know, maybe that like does something to whatever chemicals are in the air that were causing some of the fight, whatever. But they're just like they're suddenly just like
Reset.
their minds are elsewhere at that point. They're just like, hey, wait, you know, the big naked monkey came in here and like broke us up and like stuck his thumbs in our mouth, and now we got sprayed with water. That sucks. So that tends to work, and I would do the same thing with Chahoua, but I've never seen that with Chahoua. I've never had any of my Chahoua fight. But with lychees, I think it's a real challenge, and that's why prices on lychees generally stay high, and why breeding them is difficult. It's difficult because they're not consistent producers, and you have pairs that are angelic with each other for 2 or 3 years, and then one day you come in the room and it's like a freaking bloodbath. It's like, what the hell is going on here? And it just happens. I think there's really nothing you can do to prevent that other than watch your animals, and then, you know, I've had success of, you know, when you have geckos that suddenly become incompatible, is to set up a completely new cage and just move them into that and put them into completely new surroundings. And that's worked for me a couple of times, of like animals that just would not get along, that had gotten along, but then just suddenly didn't. I just set up a completely new cage in a different part of the room, put them in it, and again, it's like a big reset for them. They're like,
Reset,
oh,
yeah.
like,
It's a
where the
good
heck
trick to have in the good trick to have in the old book, man.
Yeah.
So do you ever, your Chahuas and lychees alike, do you ever repair them? Will you ever have a pair and then, like, say 2 years later switch them with something else, or once you make a pair, you're set on that pair? That pair's forever a pair.
I'm generally forever that pair.
Me too. Me too.
This year, I'm kind of forced in a position where I've got to switch a couple of pairs, and it's because I had incompatibility issues last year with a couple of pairs, and I had incompatibility issues with one pair, the pair that was fighting a lot, and I had another pair that just was not productive. They got along fine, but eggs were always infertile. I wasn't observing a lot of breeding behavior. I know it's a male and female because they had produced before, but they just were not. They were not being productive, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna switch things up and see if I can change that. One pairing went well. The other pairing did not go well. Where it was immediately fighting, stuff like that. So I separated them, and I'm going to try another week. I'm going to make up a whole neutral cage again and see if that works. One year I tried splitting a male between two females. That didn't work. That was a disaster. It was like Tank, my big Brossex male. He was paired with a pine mix, and they had produced some decent babies, and I had a different female that I wanted to try and pair them to see if I could bring out a little bit more color and pattern. And I didn't have a male for her either. So I was like, okay, I'm going to see if I can split Tank between these two females. Okay. Tank is a very, very large male, but
how much does he weigh, by the way?
He's 345 grams.
He is that big, okay.
Yeah, and he's not GT. It's like he's a 345 gram non-GT. So I tried pairing him to a different female. She kicked his ass for 2 or 3 days, and she was much smaller than him. She was like 60 to 70 grams smaller than him, and she kicked his ass up one side of the cage and the other. So eventually I was like, oh, crap, I got to separate him. I tried putting him back in with the original female. She rejected him and kicked his ass too, to where I didn't get any babies out of Tank at all that year because both, it was like the first one was just like, I tried putting with the second one and she was like, no, I don't like you. And I tried putting him back with the original and she was like, where'd you go, you cheater? And that's it.
Right? That's what it sounds like.
So
Shit, Jerry
so
Springer show.
so for
Oh
two so
man.
for 2 years I didn't get any babies out because that blew it for that season and the next season.
That
It just
sucks.
he
He's
just
something you want to produce too. You want to
yeah,
replicate him. That
yeah.
sucks.
So now I got him a completely different female, and they're perfect. Because I mean, I knew as long as I had a female that was going to be a little bit calm, and had a lot of color and pattern to her, it'd be a good match for him. Um, and it may have been because I gave him a couple years off that he wasn't stressed out with having to breed, so he was more confident. Whatever.
Makes
But
sense.
as soon as I put him in with that new female, this was like 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm.
They've been fine, and they've been together ever since. And I'm not touching that. But yeah, it's
Huh.
it's kind of Leachianus breeders face this probably more than Chahoua, or maybe Chahoua breeders face it as well. Of just like sometimes what in your mind what you want to have for a breeding project for certain
Mm.
pairings just isn't going to happen because you're going to have incompatibility issues, and you have to resist the temptation sometimes of saying it'd be great to pair this animal to this animal because then I could have this kind of outcome
Might not work. Huh?
instead of but this animal is already paired up with a mate and they are getting along fine and producing. Don't mess with that.
Yeah.
So you don't always, if you try to force something, and maybe that's what it is, you're trying to force something because of you want the specific outcome, and just sometimes you just got to like throw in the towel and be like, all right, I tried this, it's not going to work, I got to go back to what was working. So
Now, your Chahuas and
mhm,
lychees alike again as well. I mean, I guess the lychees you're kind of isolated with locales. I guess
mhm,
that would help. But being that there's no genes, right? Like really not no genes or morphs or whatever we're tracing. When you go to pair two Chahuas, what
mhm,
characteristics are you looking for to pair them, being that we don't have these genes to follow? Are you just looking for visual similarities in two
mhm.
animals? How are you making your decision to pair two Chihuahuas and Lychees if it's not locale specific? Like what are you
Yeah.
looking for in the animal?
For starters, they're not related,
Okay.
and
Awesome.
typically they're not from the same breeder.
Okay.
Even if they're from the same breeder but different pairings, I tend to avoid that. I try to get in as much genetic diversity as possible. Um, the other thing I'm looking for is, before I look at color and pattern, I'm looking at compatible body type. So if you have a Chahoua or Leachianus that is more of a long and lean body type,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm trying to pair that gecko with something that is also a long and lean body type.
Okay.
If you have one that's a little bit chunky, a little bit more of a stouter type gecko, okay, try to get that with a gecko that again is going to be a similar body type.
Okay.
I tend to have
I
fewer
like that.
problems with compatibility, and then you can look at, okay, then you can look at color and pattern, and you can be like, okay, this has fantastic color and white collar. This one's got decent color, but has a really good white collar. Let's bring these together and see what we can produce out. And sometimes, and this again goes back to being careful about who you buy from and asking
Yeah.
a lot of questions about what the parents look like, and if you can, what the siblings look like. Of
There you go.
okay, so this animal doesn't necessarily express a ton of, if you're like with breeding Pine Islands, if you're looking
Yeah.
for high white, this animal doesn't particularly have a ton of high white, but its parents did and its siblings did. So it's got some genetic power within it to
That's
produce some really good animals. So again, it's important to know the history and the lineage of your animals that you're pairing together. Um, so that's really it.
we've been
It's like
seeing a We've been seeing a lot of that lately. During the whole COVID thing, a lot of
oh yeah,
people, you see what happened, right? So everybody's
yeah.
chasing these crazy white collar animals, and a lot were being made without crazy white collars, right?
Yep.
And they were
Yep.
being sold for much less. Now all those animals are of breeding age, right? And all my
Hmm.
buddies that have bought those animals from Troy, from Rainy Day, from everybody that had these crazy animals, they're
Yep.
buying the no collar siblings. They're producing some crazy animals, Rob. Like I'm talking about full blown white backs, tail, hips,
Yep.
lats. I mean, they're coming out crazy from animals with no white at all. Like
Yep.
it's the
And
lineage. It's insane.
then you'll also, and I've got a pair that's a really nice high white pair, and they produced a really nice high white pair. They also produced a pair that had no white. You know,
Really?
they
See?
produced a baby that had just very, very little pattern on it. It's really
Interesting.
pretty, but it doesn't have anywhere near as much as white as I would expect to come out of that pairing.
He's one of them
I think
genetic
that,
powerhouses. Then he'll probably
yeah,
make some crazy white stuff.
and
Huh.
that kind of gets, and that gets back into the point that I said though about, like, I don't pair geckos that are related, and
Yeah.
I try not to pair them even from the same breeder,
Yeah.
because I like sometimes to get surprises, and sometimes you're breeding like, okay, this one looks decent, this one looks decent. There's some cool lineage going on here, but it's kind of, you're blending a couple of different things for lineage when it comes to color and pattern. Stuff pops out of there sometimes that you get really surprised by, and sometimes it's like, oh, these are all pretty drab,
Yeah.
but sometimes they're really amazing.
What do you
Yeah,
think about the pastel? Do you have any pastel chihuahuas like those pastel?
absolutely.
Really? I got one too, a green one, and I can't manage to find anybody else, but I've seen some that are mind blowing, like these crazy neon electric green and these crazy pinks. It's like, wow, screw the collar. They're just in your face, whoa, animals, man. And I don't see, you'd think you'd see more of them. They're breathtaking animals. Tell
Yeah,
us a little bit about that. What do you got going on with those?
so I've got a bunch of those. So the Chahoua project, the breeding projects I have breeding projects that I do for color,
Mm-hmm.
and I have breeding projects that I do for high white, high collar stuff.
Yeah.
Um, the color stuff is where you get into the pastels, where I've got some that are like pastel green and purple,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Ooh, like the
and
purple.
ones that are very like pastel and almost yellowish. So
Mm-hmm.
like a pastel green
Mm-hmm.
with like yellow pattern. But the pastel and purple ones that I have, those are really 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 pretty. Um, Paul from Rack House had made some of the ones that I got, and
Wow.
Tracy Saltmarsh also
Huh.
produced some of the ones that I got. And again, those are animals that um, they have a lot of color to them,
Yeah.
but it's ones that do not appeal to people who are only fixated on like the white collar stuff. They also tend to be stuff that has a little bit more of the older lineage, stuff that goes back to Tremper, stuff that goes back a ways. Um, but yeah, they're really really pretty. They're
Do you
really
think
pretty.
it's a hypo of some sort? Do you think something's different? Like when I look at mine, I don't know how to explain it. I wouldn't ever
Mm,
step out on a limb and try to say that it's a genetic anything, but
yeah,
it just seems like even when he's fired down, I can almost see through him. Like
yeah,
he
yeah,
turns paper like rice paper white. Like I can
hmm,
see veins and guts in his
yeah,
stomach. It's such a gnarly looking thing. But I've always wondered, like, and he's not paired. I just have him
yeah.
single. He's just
Mm.
growing. He's 3 years
I
old
don't.
now, but I don't know what it
Yeah,
is. Is it a hypo? Is it a what? I don't know.
I think I think I see that with some of the Leachianas too, where you look
Mm,
at it and you're like, is this hypo?
mm,
I haven't done enough breeding to prove it out, and the breeding that I
yeah,
have done to try and prove it out hasn't been definitive.
yeah, okay.
Um, and so I think something could be going on, and maybe it's not a true hypo. Maybe it's something. Maybe it's some type of codominant trait, and it's not a simple recessive. I don't know. Um, and to be honest, I don't care if it is one way or the other.
Yeah,
It's like I know what the animal is, I know what it can produce, and I know that some of the offspring are going to look like that.
okay. So
But
just
I'm not.
ask, have you paired? Have you gotten? Do they reproduce themselves? Like, are you making out of your pastel lines, are they consistently making more pastels, or have you had your pastel pairs make like a regular Pine Island with the contrasty
Hmm.
diamonds down the back? I mean, what are they making?
So I have one that I produced this past season from one of my pastel pairs that looks very odd.
Okay,
That has no pattern for the most part, and is very very light.
right.
Um, so I'm curious to see how that one grows up compared to some of the siblings that looked more like traditional Pine Islands. Very, I mean, pretty
Really?
with color, but this one looks very different. It's the same thing with the pastel line that I did with the Lichianas, where
Yeah.
you end up with something that popped like this looks different. Held that one back, and
Mhm.
then through like four different generations of pairing it with other things and then trying to come back to it, um, have seen it replicated to where I think there is something going on. And is it hypo? Is it? I don't know. I don't know.
You're well
But
into working with your own animals, huh? Like, see, I'm
I
finally
do.
like that's my goal. My goal is to eventually get to the point where I've produced everything that I have. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't want it to be related clearly, but I want to be
Yeah.
working with animals that like I have generationally created. Like I can tell you what this thing's grandmother produced. Like
Hmm.
I I'm clearly I don't want them related. I have nothing. I do. You keep saying it. It's bothering me now
Hmm.
about not having things from the same breeders because I have like three females all from the same breeder, but the
Hmm.
males aren't. And they
Yep.
are all from different pairs, but the males aren't. And now I'm like, damn, he's right. I probably should have spread this out more.
Hmm. Yeah.
But
Like I mean, what I did with the pastel project was like, okay, so the original pair that started it was a Pinky to Yate that I got from Adam Lieberman, and the female was a Pine Nuami from Philippe. And I had heard after I started producing this, I had heard that some of the suspected hypos that Philippe produced were from his Nuami line.
oh,
So that's where I suspect some of this might be coming
okay,
from. But it's like that combined with the Pinky line from Adam Lieberman, and then I kept back that one baby out of like at this point 30 plus that pair has produced that
so
just looked
crazy to produce
that
that
just
man.
that
Oh,
that just looked really 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 different.
mm,
I kept her back and then bred her to an animal that I got from Cody at Raspberry. That was part of
okay,
his fire and ice line. Blended those together, kept back the best male from that, and then paired that back to a different super high color line from Adam Lieberman again, and then
mm,
kept one of those pairings up, and then I have other females that I'm growing up from the males that I held back from last year. One of them was from Boris from one of his super high
Oregon?
color lines.
Okay.
Um, so it's a line that I have going, but
Mm,
I'm very conscious about bringing in some very
yeah,
selective other color
yeah.
lines to add to it that I think are in line with my goals for that project of again very light pastel base color with high color on the blotches. So
Nice, nice.
so
That's gotta.
it's
I
fun.
mean, you've accomplished a lot, man. That's it's. I feel like a fanboy, man. Like you have done everything I want to do, man. I'm like, damn. I can't wait to the day that I can talk like Rob, man. Like I've done this and produced this and have this and have experienced and witnessed and observed all of this. Like I live for that stuff. I live for these observations, man. To you know, coming up. It already ended. Damn, it just ended on us.
I was
What
just
the?
gonna say you just froze.
Holy crap! I think the video ended.
We went long enough.
Oh man. Well, I think that was that was it. Well, it's been 2 hours. I could
Yeah, we're good.
honestly talk to you, Rob, for another 4 hours. I'd like to save some of the conversation and stuff for next time. I'd love to have you
Yeah, sure.
back and maybe talk about some of the Saracenorums you're getting into. Um,
I
I
just
keep
started the
into.
Sarahs.
I don't have many people to talk to about them and kick ideas around about.
Yeah.
And
I
It'd be
probably wouldn't be the
super
best
cool.
person. I probably wouldn't be the best person to talk about Sarahs. I just got into him last year. You know who would be good? Carl Vargas at
Carl, why do I know
so
that name?
he's at South Tex Gex.
Oh, you were telling me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, he has so some of the Sarahs that I got from him are a line that he started, the caramel blotched line.
Yeah.
He would be good to talk about Sarah Sonorum.
What is happening to our screen right now?
I can see you.
All right. All right. I don't know. I think something got messed up. I don't. Jason controls the tech side. I'm like, Rob, for me to send a text message is like virtually impossible. I don't even know how to send a text message, let alone set up a podcast and run all this stuff. It's like
Yeah.
impossible. If it wasn't for my buddy Jason, we would have zero podcasts. But
Okay.
Christ, he can edit it. He'll put it all back together. He knows how to do all that fancy jazz.
Okay.
Dude, again, I cannot thank you enough, Rob. I had this idea of starting this new Cal thing, because we have our podcast and we're having great success with it, talking about all types of species of geckos all over the world, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
learning every time. I'm the learner of the group,
Mm-hmm.
But my heart is in New Caledonia, man. I love Chahuas, I love Leachianis, I love my Sarahs. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I and I keep
Hey, can you guys hear me?
15 different species of geckos. Yeah, you hear us, Jay? Jay.
Hold on. Hey, you guys, you're still live.
All right, we're wrapping up right now. It cut out and messed up on us, so I don't.
Okay, it just stopped recording. It's back recording now. If you guys want to keep going.
Yeah,
right.
we're wrapping up.
We can wrap it up. Yeah.
2 hours. Yeah.
All right, cool.
You got to think about people listening to them, and I want to do another episode. I mean, that's the hard thing with me too. Is right. Like I know I could listen to stuff like this for hours, but most people are not going to get the meat and the true information in a 2 hour podcast. It's hard to explain. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around the right way to do a podcast. If you want to get information to somebody, what's the best way to do it? I don't know. I assume just let the man with the information talk. Like that's my thing. Is like put the talent on the stage. That's what I'm trying to do. But it's hard to how do you limit 15 years of knowledge and experience into 2 hours? Like, damn, it's kind of impossible, right? Like,
Yeah.
But again, I am completely honored that you gave us this time and came on here with us. I know so many people are looking forward to this and looking forward to, seeing what you have to say about Chahuas and geckos in general. Your name is like super high class in the hobby. You have a very,
Thanks. I appreciate that.
elite name. Hey, not me. You did it. You did it. You earned it. You're super humble. You're super intelligent. You produce great stuff. It's what it's about, man.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Absolutely. If you want to tell everybody where they can find you, where they can maybe purchase your animals, give us, your spiel real quick. Give us your business pitch.
So the stuff that I have available is generally on my Morph Market page. So on Morph Market, I am Haneisen Premium Reptiles. In case you can't see my name on the bottom of the screen, it's Haneisen. So it's Haneisen Premium Reptiles on Morph Market. I'm also on Instagram. If you just search for my name, you'll see me, and on Facebook as well. And if ever you have questions about availability, if you see something you're looking for that isn't listed, obviously just shoot me a message and let me know. And if you have all of my customers who get geckos from me, everybody gets my own personal care sheet. They get full lineage on all the animals that they get, and I answer questions for the life of the animal.
That's awesome, guys. I'm telling you, check him out. Check his page out. If you want some great animals, you want some great service, you want quality in your life and your collection, you want your collection to be worth something, if you want a healthy collection, guys, buy top-notch animals, man. Check Rob's stuff out. You will not be disappointed, man. I'm telling you, just scroll through his page. Thank me later. Honestly. One more shout out. I want to shout out my buddy Wally over at Supreme Geckos, guys. Tomorrow's the final day of the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. So head on over there, register. Check out the donors for the year. A lot of great people contributed to this event, man, to make this happen for us out here, man. Shoot Wally a thank you. Go check it out, man. Check it out. Tomorrow's the last day. It's going to be a lot of fun, man. You be over there live tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, middle of the mountain time. I don't know. But check it out on YouTube, IG, everywhere else, Facebook, all that jazz. I appreciate you guys coming. Catch you on the next episode of New Cow Corner.
Thank you.
Jay, you there?